Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Gary Day of the 187th District in Lehigh and Berks counties. On today's program, I'd like to focus on gaming in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board's primary mission is to protect the public through regulating, licensing, and monitoring the practice of gaming or gambling. However, a recent grand jury report found a number of concerns, and they made 21 recommendations for improvement on this mission, recommendations that the House Republicans are taking seriously. On today's program, I'd like to welcome Representative Curt Schroder, who is chairman of the House Gaming Oversight Committee. He's here to discuss legislation that was drafted to address some of the recommendations in the report I just referenced. Representative Schroder, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Gary. Good to be with you.
Well, I'd like to thank you for being here. The chairman of our committees serve as the person who collates the information in that particular topic, looks at it, works with other members, and brings different things before his committee through public hearings to gather information on a particular topic, and then eventually we discuss with each other and vote upon those things. As the chairman of the Gaming Oversight Committee, you and other members have put forward legislation to further regulate the gaming industry, and it's you've kind of put it into a package. What do you feel are maybe the top 3 or 4 things in that package?
Well, certainly one of the most important features of the package to implement the findings and the recommendations of the grand jury report, is to move the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement, what we call the BIE, out from under the Gaming Control Board and put it in a separate independent entity such as the Attorney General's office or perhaps under the state police. That came to light because of some real egregious abuses that took place, especially early on during the licensing process of the initial casinos that were up and licensed. What the grand jury uncovered was that background information, background history that was reported to the Gaming Control Board was actually changed by gaming board officials. In other words, they sent the reports back and said, take this information out. Information that was harmful to the applicants and could have conceivably, in fact probably, would have resulted in some applicants not being licensed. This was obviously a very disturbing development in the early phases of licensing different individuals and the casinos that they were representing. So the recommendation was to, so that this type of interference could not happen again, the recommendation was to remove the bureau that does the investigating out from under the direct control of the Gaming Control Board, make it separate and independent. That way this type of interference would not happen again. And the interesting thing about this is that we in the House actually passed this bill, the bill to do just what they're talking about, before this grand jury even came out with its report. Because there had been, prior to this grand jury investigation, other indications that this problem had happened. So I think the House, to our credit, we moved expeditiously at the beginning of the session, and we reported that bill not only out of our Gaming Oversight Committee, but we voted it in the full House. And it has been sitting in the Senate ever since, and we need the Senate to come along now and approve this legislation so that we can get this, what I feel is the most important recommendation of this grand jury, that we can get it into law to the governor's desk. And the governor said he'll sign it.
Right.
Governor Corbett is very much in favor of this particular initiative.
Well, and let me just stop on that idea for a moment. The whole idea is that the Gaming Oversight Committee was trying to issue licenses, and that this function, the investigation function, could have derailed another responsibility of theirs. So we've seen as a House, as an institution, to separate those two. Is that how you would characterize it?
That's exactly right. There are principles in administrative law, for instance, that says that the investigation and enforcement and prosecution function cannot be housed under the same unit as the judicial function of that agency. In other words, those will be making decisions. And it has been best to separate those processes out. Under the Gaming Act that was originally enacted, it had all of them housed under the Gaming Control Board. And because of that, this is just another glaring example of why those functions should not be mixed under one agency. So, one of the strengths of the Gaming Act is the exhaustive background investigations that an applicant must go through in order to be licensed. But like we said earlier, the result of that product was thwarted by officials in the Gaming Control Board who, either were not comfortable, didn't like certain information that came through. There was in the report a quote from one of the licensing attorneys saying, they felt that their job was to take unfit applicants and make them fit. Now, excuse me, but right there, that shows, I think, just a horrendous error of judgment, and that's putting it kindly, on the part of those at the Gaming Board that allowed this to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the next question is then where do you put that authority? And I believe that the strength of our institution, our government in the Commonwealth here, is separation of power. Don't let too much power at any level accumulate in any particular area. So there's two different places you had mentioned, either the state police or the independently elected Attorney General's office. Which do you favor? Do you favor either way?
Well, I guess, as we said, I favor putting it in the Attorney General's office, since that is the bill that we reported out and that we did pass. I am, however, completely open to putting it under the state police. If we could get agreement with the Senate to do that, I believe the House would act favorably. I think our main goal has always been to get it to be independent, separated out from under the control and jurisdiction of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. I think where it goes is of less consequence than actually getting it out from under there.
How about other legislation that you have in the package? That's one that's primary, one of the primary pieces of legislation. What other pieces of this package are you particularly proud of?
Well, there are other components of this package that deal with basically what you might call openness, transparency in the operations of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. There were many observations and complaints in the grand jury report about the secrecy under which the board operates, the vast number of executive sessions that they hold, and whether or not they are discussing things behind executive session that ought to be best and legally required to be discussed in public. So we are trying to make their processes, more transparent, more open, and we've already passed a couple bills to accomplish that. We passed them recently out of the Gaming Oversight Committee and now onto the full House for consideration. There's also been suggestions in the gaming grand jury report to have restrictions on post-employment limits from service at the Gaming Control Board. In other words, we don't want a revolving door where those who work at the Gaming Control Board go on to work for one of the casino companies or corporations for vast sums of money and that sort of thing. So we want to try to keep some sort of reasonable time limit. You can't restrict employment of people. The courts will come down on you for that, but we can reasonably restrict the time between when they serve in government and when they take a job in the regulated private sector under which they used to regulate.
And I'm also interested and wanted to ask you a question about many people in my district come up to me and talk about this separation that we're talking about, the separation between the regulating responsibility and the industry, let's say. In particular, between elected officials in the gaming industry. Now, there were laws that were established, and gaming and gambling in Pennsylvania is newer in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So we as a body, as an institution, we tried our best to set up the laws, and now we continue to monitor it, and that's your role as the chairman, and continue to implement other laws that would continue to make the industry better in Pennsylvania. Can you tell me about the laws that prohibit contributions, political contributions to elected officials, and any background or past history about those?
Sure. That's a very good area to talk about, because one of our main concerns has always been whether gaming, organized gambling, the interests that are behind that, whether they will have, let's say, an outsized effect or impact on legislation here in the Commonwealth. So in order to try to limit that, of course they have the right, just like any other individual or organization out there, to have their say. But in order to, that they don't have outsized influence, we have prohibited anyone who is licensed or applying for a license, or the holder of any gaming license, to make contributions to political candidates. So there is a complete prohibition in the law right now on that, which I think is a good thing. Now, that was originally passed in Act 72, the original gaming law that brought slots into Pennsylvania. And what happened was an investor from Montgomery County, I believe, in one of the casinos, brought legal action on that law, saying it was unconstitutional, that his constitutional rights were being violated. That went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and in what I thought was, frankly, a legally dubious opinion at best, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in his favor and struck down the restrictions on political contributions in the original Gaming Act. Well, the court was clear on why they did it. Even though I didn't agree with their reasoning, they were clear on why they did it. What we did is we went back and corrected that section of the law that they specifically cited, which was little more than in a legislative intent section. We made the necessary tweaks and changes there and acted to reinstitute the ban on contributions from the gaming industry to elected officials in Pennsylvania. And that law has stood now since its enactment. To this point, there have been no suits brought to strike it down or anything, even though there were some who were kind of rumbling and threatening right after we passed it, saying that they might very well do it. Up to this point, that hasn't happened. So hopefully that will not happen, or should it happen, I believe that the courts will uphold the legislature this time based upon the reasoning in their prior decision that we corrected.
So as far as you're concerned, do you believe that, with that law not being challenged and on the books today, that there's a clear separation from gambling money being infused into the political system and legislation or laws being affected by political contributions? Do you feel like there's a clear barrier there?
I do believe there's a clear barrier, a clear dividing line. There is no money that is allowed to individuals, to PACs, to anything like that. And I think we wrote as broad a ban on political contributions as we possibly could. If anyone has any suggestions to tighten it up and make it better, I'm all for it. Would be glad to entertain that. But so far, it seems to be working.
Great. Well, let's take a quick break. I appreciate that the chairman's here today, and stay tuned to us because we're going to continue this discussion in a minute. We'll return and talk more about the reforms in the gaming industry and also some legislation that I've proposed when Legislative Report will return.
Did you know that Fort Indiantown Gap, located in Lebanon County, is home to Pennsylvania's only Veterans Memorial? C.J. Frederick of Westchester, Bucks County, submitted the winning design that now honors those men and women who have sacrificed their lives in defending this great country. Dedicated to the Commonwealth on October 7, 2001, the Veterans Memorial is surrounded by freestanding walls and houses an amphitheater, which can accommodate large crowds during an event. Strategically placed in the front of the amphitheater is a tomb that reminds visitors of those who gave their lives protecting the freedoms of this nation. The design suggests a war-damaged structure in which Frederick wanted to impress upon those visiting the horrific arena of war. Now you know.
Did you know that the state capitol is not only the epicenter of the Commonwealth's governing bodies, but was once home to 390 preserved Civil War flags? During the war, it was customary for each state to furnish their regiments in battle with flags representing their contribution to the Union Army. After the war, Pennsylvania's military department was responsible for collecting the flags, and in 1872 they were reverently housed in the Capitol. Following the completion of construction on the new Capitol building in 1914, the Civil War flags were removed to the Capitol Rotunda. They were kept untouched in custom-made flag cases until 1982, when the Capitol Preservation Committee initiated its Save the Flags project. Throughout the years, dust and long-term vertical display of the flags had begun to devastate the brittle silk fabric and painted designs. The flags were removed by local textile conservators and were repaired and preserved in storage units that protect the relics from light, dust, and excessive handling. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Gary Day. We've been discussing legislation that is seeking to improve the integrity and accountability of gaming in Pennsylvania, including the Gaming Control Board. My guest is Gaming Oversight Committee Chairman, Representative Curt Schroder. Thanks again for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Sure, Gary.
In an attempt to keep a clear barrier between the gaming industry and state officials, elected officials, appointed officials, I'm drafting legislation to prohibit state officials from working in gaming interests after they leave, and vice versa. Could you explain how, for our viewers, how does this fit into your overall package that you're pushing through committee and gathering information on and trying to do what we do, persuade each other to pass things in the committee out to the House floor? Could you explain how my legislation fits into the package?
Sure. Well, your legislation, which I believe is House Bill 2012, is a direct response to one of the recommendations of the grand jury. Currently, executive level public employees, public officials, and party officers are restricted for 1 year from post official employment in the gaming industry. Your bill, of course, would increase that to 2 years. So there would be a 2-year ban and a longer period of separation from government service before one could work, at certain levels in the gaming industry. And I don't know if one could go and say become a blackjack dealer or not in that time. But I think what we're really concerned about are the governing aspect in
Right.
these corporations that that run the gaming industry in Pennsylvania.
And altogether, our ethics law altogether generally says that we can't use the power of our position, our office, for any personal pecuniary interest or benefit. And I think that's important, that the longer we make that. I mean, I'm someone who wants to allow people to be able to make a living.
Sure.
But to me, it's clear that if it's within a year after you leave office, that you're definitely still using the power of your position, that you may have made decisions beforehand, and this takes it away. The further I could make it, to be honest with you, I was looking at 4 years, and that's a little bit too far,
Yeah.
and we settled on 2 years for this legislation. So I appreciate you allowing me to bring this through committee and giving it a fair shot at the committee level and be part of the package. Anything else about that I can
No,
make
absolutely. I think you've summed it up. I think you've summed it up quite well, and you also made the point that I think everyone needs to be aware of. Would be very difficult, if not legally impossible, to implement a total ban, because courts have ruled very specifically that a total ban on that type of employment would interfere with someone's ability and right to make a living. So they will, the longer the ban is, the more likely it is to be struck down. So we're always trying to hit the balance, strike the right balance between what we think the court will uphold and what will also protect the public's interest in not having someone too closely associated, with, being a government official, going right into that line of work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your work as our chairman. And also, there's some legislation pending now that where current law prohibits a Category 3 gaming facility like the Sands in the Lehigh Valley from being located within 30 miles of another one. There's a radius that you draw around that location, and no other Category 3, and it was meant to kind of protect the licensing procedure that we set up in Pennsylvania, and it was a 30-mile radius. Now there's legislation to reduce that to 15. One of the things that happens is if we're going to be doing this type of work, the last thing I want to see is another one plop down 15 miles away from an existing one in the Lehigh Valley. It's really 2 districts away from my district, so it's not a personal in my backyard, but it's something as an overall, when I look at the entire Commonwealth and I look at our licensing procedure, whether you're for gambling or against it, we're trying our best to deal with and regulate this industry as best as we can. When you look at that, what are your thoughts on this legislation? Can you tell me a little bit about your ideas and thoughts on this?
Certainly there needs to be concern with the closeness and the distance on which the gaming facilities, the casinos are operating. The problem that has come up with the Category 3 or the so-called resort license casinos is that the first 2 that were given licenses and up for that resort license have only been subject to a 15-mile radius or 15-mile separation. At some point, a senator, I believe, I'm not sure if the senator is still serving with us or not, but at some point a senator inserted a provision into a bill that for the Category 3 license that has not yet been issued, that would be a 30-mile limitation. So what we actually have is, it's been cited by some, is an inconsistency where this licensee, whoever that licensee might eventually be, for this resort, so-called resort casino, is going to have a greater mileage restriction than the other Category 3s that are already have been awarded in the state. So there was an effort by some in the General Assembly to sort of conform it and bring it into line with the other Category 3 licenses. Now I know that has raised issues and concerns by some in the Lehigh Valley area about the impact
Right.
with one of the prominent casinos
Right.
being already up and operating there.
And I didn't complete the sentence in my long question that I had for you, but one of the concerns that many of us have that are Lehigh Valley legislators is that we don't want to look at reducing the success at the Sands in order to have another one and then have 2 mediocre,
Sure.
moderately successful entities that close to each other. So it's clear to me in talking with many of the people that operate the Sands and represent the Sands that many of the people come from New York and New Jersey to make that a successful facility, and we're a little concerned with putting one between them and that market and what it would do, and whether it would be water down the market and make both of them less viable facilities, which is something I don't know about. I would believe you're concerned with. We don't want to we want this to be as successful as possible as long as gambling's still in the Commonwealth.
Right. And what I would also say in response to that is for Category 3 casinos, these are resort casinos or casinos associated with a resort property that have very strenuous restrictions that have been put on them in law and by the Gaming Control Board in recent regulations that they've enacted as to who can participate in gaming at their facility. It is very much limited to patrons of either the hotel, patrons of, let's say, an organization that is holding a convention there, and that sort of thing. So theoretically, someone who's coming in from New York or anywhere else in the area just to gamble at a casino should not be going into a Category 3 resorts casino. They should be going into the Sands or another, casino, any other casinos that might be in the area, unless they had actual business at the hotel.
Okay.
Unless they, were there for a convention, unless they were staying there for some particular reason. Now, Is the system perfect? Are the restrictions perfect to prevent that type of thing from happening? The only thing I can say about that is time will tell.
Right.
Certainly as these get up and running, we will know better based upon the experience and the enforcement and what is found to be happening at these resort facilities. We'll have a better gauge of that in the future.
Well, let me go on to my final question for you. And this is the one that many people in my district, while they're watching this show, are standing up in front of the TV, probably talking to the TV, asking this question. So I need to ask you this. There were big promises made about something that's very important in my district, property tax relief, or school property tax relief in particular. And there were many promises made. We heard vote for gaming, vote for gambling to come into Pennsylvania, and your school property taxes will be reduced. Many of our residents have seen very little reduction. Whatever reduction they saw, their taxes were increased to negate that. Could you elaborate on this issue of gambling dollars being used for school property tax reduction and relief, and whether the state of it now, and also what is the future? Do you think there's a better future for this to maybe occur?
Gary, I think you'll probably agree with me. That was a classic example of overselling and under-delivering. When this came in under Governor Rendell, it was his, billed as his way to fulfill a commitment that he made to reduce property taxes. Governor Rendell was a terrific salesman. There is no doubt about it. And he did sell the proposal, not only to the General Assembly, but to the public at large. And unfortunately, the expectations that were built up, by Governor Rendell, perhaps by the casino industry itself, or a combination of factors, led people to believe that once gambling came in, they would see their property taxes plummet. Well, we all know what the experience has been. There has been what I would call de minimis property tax reductions, maybe a few $100s here, a few $100s there, in some parts of the state less than that. So there is no doubt that this promise of tax reduction that was put out there, was not delivered. And as far as where do we go from here, Pennsylvania already has one of the highest tax rates levied on casinos. So, I don't know whether we would be able to do anything in that regard to beef up the property tax refunds to constituents. But it's something that we are constantly concerned about. I think the answer to school property tax problems lies not within gaming, frankly, but lies in property tax reform, in my mind at least, the elimination of school property taxes, perhaps for, a sales tax approach or some other approach. I think we're more likely to find the solution there than, going down the gambling alley again, which did not prove to be as fruitful as was originally sold or predicted.
Well, I really appreciate your answer and your interest in this issue. Overall, gambling in general. Also, the school property tax issue is one of the top things in my district and in yours as well, I'm sure. It's getting hotter and hotter across the Commonwealth. Not quite yet to a majority in the House, but we're working on that to try to get some relief there. It's something that I can't have a program like this and not talk about. It's
Absolutely,
something that
sure.
we need to touch base with, make sure that the people who are watching this who don't know the story hear the story and understand the story. I'd like to talk more about this. As a matter of fact, the chairman has probably started my next program for me already with school property tax elimination. But that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Gary Day. If you have questions about any state issue, feel free to contact my local office or through my website. That information will be on the screen in a minute. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for another edition of Legislative Report.